Good morning, Saintlanders. How are you? We trust that you are well. I'll ask you to be a little bit patient with the lighting. As I think I've described before, this house faces northeast, and it gets a lot of sun. And being here in the northern Karoo, it is sunny at the best of times, with the result that even if I make videos in the late afternoon, very late afternoon, this room is bathed in light. By then the sun is in the opposite. It's gone to the other side. But even so, if I don't close the curtains, the outside light just overwhelms the two lamps I have inside. But today I'm not in the mood to sit in dimness. So let's get started. I'd like to chat to you today about the war in Ukraine and, as you will have seen from the title, World War III. I am a firm believer, and I always have been, that biblical translation is absolutely, it's vital, and it should not be done loosely at all, because I believe that God, if He exists, and if He made all those starry things, if He's that good, He would probably have mastered language too. And that every word that He used would be used intentionally, and that there would be no substitute for that word, no equal substitute. I also, this is a bit of an aside, have read a couple of books on the numerology, if you like, of the Bible. And I was fascinated. Dr. Ivan Panin was a pioneer in Christianity. And Judaism, this thing has long been mastered. And we are very, very, very far behind. But Dr. Ivan Panin, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, a former atheist, in order to disprove the existence of God, did work on the numerology that comes out of the words and the letters. And that converted him to Christianity, and he became an evangelist through mathematics for the rest of his life. During which time he revealed that the magic of the numerology that he discovered, and it is magical, it's absolutely, it's something quite out of this world, disappeared the more that a Bible was translated, or the more that the Bible was translated. So if he took very original versions of the Bible, such as Qumran manuscripts and so on, Dead Sea Scroll manuscripts, and he interrogated the numerology, and then he took a subsequent translation and a subsequent and a subsequent and a subsequent, that magic disappeared. That fingerprint of God in His holy word disappeared gradually, more and more and more, to the point where biblical translations or Bibles, modern ones such as the Message, they just lack any of that magic of God. Now, I was chatting to my oldest son about this one day, and he appeared to me he didn't like hearing what I had to say. And afterwards I worried for years, many years, perhaps 10 years, very much that I might have discouraged him and discouraged his faith. On the contrary, it grew. So he was able to surmount that hurdle, jump that hurdle. Thank God. And in my opinion, the same holds true for Oom-Sina van Rensburg's prophecies. And I have a big problem with my own work because I'm never sure of the extent to which it is true to the words that God or Oom-Sina would have wanted me to use when talking about the things that Oom-Sina foretold. But when we talk of World War III, and when we talk of World War III, I do so with a great deal of caution. Today, I am cautious about the prophecy that reads, "When we look again, it has already started." That phrase. When we look again, we see that it has already started. That phrase, to me, must be handled with a great deal of care because of the reasons that I've given you. To my way of thinking, having meditated on this very much, I hope I can, in a good way, convey, in a faithful way, convey that phrase to you in the following modern terms. If you're driving your car and the kids are performing on the back seat, and perhaps you want to give them a clip, or you want to put a biscuit back in their mouth, or whatever, and you can't quite manage without craning your neck around to see what you're doing or what they're doing, and you turn back to watch the road as you should, things may have changed. You may be closer to the vehicle in front of you than you would like to be, or it could be braking. And to put it into words regarding this possibly emerging World War III, I think that we are going to look again and see that it has already started in those terms, that only those words do justice because they are the right and correct and true words, godly intended words. Because Oom-Sina used those words pertaining to World War III, or the great conflict that he described, the third great haystack in flames. The more I read Oom-Sina van Rensburg's stuff, the more baffled, or no, perplexed I become. It was easier then than it is now. Then being when I first read the first book of Adriaan Snyman about Oom-Sina van Rensburg, which was immediately after the birth of my oldest son, the one to whom I was referring earlier, on the 17th of February 2001, a blessed day. My parents came up to meet their first grandchild within a few days, perhaps a week or so, 10 days perhaps at the most. And it was then that my dad gave me that book. And I say, yesterday we did a video in which I spoke about South Africa's assisted suicide. You know, K.W. Miller is playing the role of assisting our suicide when he says that, as he has done in the past few days on a couple of occasions, that the farmers shouldn't plant this year. Or the farmers shouldn't produce this year. All farmers, crop farmers, stock farmers, and dairy farmers. And Europe appears to be, it appears as if Europe is being assisted in its own suicide. And what we're watching now is akin to a safe road ahead of us as we drive. Akin to. Perhaps it's a little bit unsafe, but it's not the end of the world. We feel safe enough to take our eyes off the road for a minute to glance at the back seat. At some point, something is going to induce us to take our eyes off Europe. What that something is going to be, I don't know. But when we look again, there will be World War III. I'm kind of mixing up two themes here, and I wish I hadn't, but I don't think it's the end of the world for this video. To talk about the assisted suicide of Europe, this is an idea that is unique to Suidlanders. I've not seen it advanced or professed, asserted anywhere else, excuse me. But Mr. Miller and I have discussed this. Does it not? Well, let me put it this way. Ostensibly, supposedly, Kamstag, the USA and NATO are doing harm to Russia in supplying arms to Ukraine. But don't you see that every single thing that has been done by Russia's apparent enemies or alleged enemies since Russia's invasion in the special military operation has harmed the West more than it has harmed Russia? I read here the Czech Republic has transferred 30 to 40% of all of the weapon systems it had possessed to Ukraine. Now we see the USA is sending M1 Abrams battle tanks. We see that the Germans have given permission for customers of theirs who had bought Leopard 2 battle tanks to pass them on to Ukraine. That was required. So under law or within the contracts between these countries pertaining to their weapon systems, it is standard practice, completely standard practice for, let's say, Australia to sell military hardware to, say, New Zealand, on the strict proviso, contracted under law, that New Zealand is not allowed to sell those systems on to any other party without Australia's approval. So Germany has now given approval for countries to sell on its Leopard 2 battle tanks, or pass on, hand over to Ukraine. Again, those countries are weakened. Not Germany necessarily, obviously, unless Germany is donating materiel, arms and armaments, if you like, or armament. Slowly but surely, Europe is being assisted towards its own suicide. Rather than do harm to Russia, it is harming itself. Yes, there's a degree of harm. Of course, the mother of a Russian boy, soldier, who gets struck by a shell from an American M777 howitzer, would say, well, of course, what a tragedy, my son, my beloved. But on balance, we know that the Ukrainians are taking far greater losses than the Russians. Although it's not being admitted in the mainstream media, and on the contrary, the mainstream media is claiming that the Russians are being hammered. We know from far better sources, really not impeccable but indisputable sources that are so well substantiated and whose version of the truth so closely corresponds to observable reality, that they are indisputable. Really, to dispute them would be silly. We know that the Ukrainians are taking losses something like, I'm going to speak a little bit loosely here to keep it simple, 10 times those of the Russians. Maybe not quite 10 times, but very close to it. So much so that I deliberately didn't choose 9 or 8 as my round number. Something like 10 times. So therefore, it's fair to say, I believe it's fair to say, that the harm that Russia is suffering doesn't justify the argument that Europe may be depleting its weapon stockpiles, but at least we're getting those Ruskies good and proper, giving them a real bloody nose. That is a false and misleading argument. The truer argument, although it is simplistic, I'm not saying that this is a brilliant argument that covers every angle. I am saying that to laymen, to you and me, it's just about fair to say that Europe is being bled white for no real good. And I'm reminded of a speech given by the then Secretary of Agriculture for the USA at a Brigham Young University, BYU University in Salt Lake City, Utah. To, I don't know what you call it. They call it, I think, a valedictory. You know, the Americans have their word for it. A graduation ceremony to you and me. Mormon University, Brigham Young University, one of the pioneers of Mormonism, in which he said that he had been present when Nikita Khrushchev told Richard Nixon that although capitalism may win the great struggle between capitalism and communism, that they, the Soviets, were sowing little seeds in Western society that would grow and bear fruit long after communism had perished. That's the anecdote that comes to my mind when I consider how Europe is being assisted to its suicide while apparently smashing the Russians. In other words, I would contend that when Annalena Baerbock, the German foreign minister, says, as she did yesterday, we are at war with Russia, she is speaking as a Trojan horse. She is speaking as a fifth column. The fifth column expression comes from it could have been the Spanish Civil War, or I can't remember, but somebody asked the general how many columns he had for a campaign. And he said, I have 4 columns and a 5th column inside the city that will rise up and help me. So traitors. And Annalena Baerbock, I put it to you, knows full well that what she and others in Europe are doing is harming Europe more than it is harming Russia. And that they are not acting as the enemies of Russia, but as the friends of Russia. It is a very, very cunning thing that they're doing. The shrewdness is unbelievable. And I put it to you that that's what they have been doing since the 24th of February. Every move that Europe has made, every move that has been driven by these childless, godless European leaders has been made knowingly to the detriment of Europe. They are the spiteful mutants in our midst. And nobody can see it. Nobody. I have not come across one single observer in the world who says, or who has said, that far from being acts of hostility to Russia, the behaviors of the European leaders have been acts of assisted suicide, or acts of assistance in Europe's suicide. And I put it to you that before very long, we're going to see that come to pass. Now I'm going to finish with this. You may say to me, now we get it. Now we get, right? The Russians, these guys, they're on the same team, traitors, probably went to communist universities. Angela Merkel, she grew up in East Germany. They are effectively allies of Russia, in effect, but they are not deliberate allies of Russia. Their hatred of themselves, of their gene pool, these spiteful mutants that the doctor, he's actually a docent, DS, like a dominee in South Africa. It's the old European academic rank between doctor and professor, docent. Bachelor with honors, master, doctor, docent, professor. Although that's slightly misleading. It's good enough. That Dr. Docent Professor Edward Dutton of Uppsala University in Finland has spoken about at great length on YouTube. And I have encouraged you many times, if you want to understand the madness in the West today, you must, if you want to comprehend, if your question to your wife is, maar hoekom? Ek kan het net nie verstaan nie, liefie. You will understand once you have watched one of those videos by him. If you search Edward Dutton, Spiteful Mutants, you will get the original and best video. Although there are others. So I was trying to say that what these spiteful mutants are doing is to the detriment of Europe and implicitly to the advantage of Russia. But it is not explicitly. This assisted suicide is not motivated by a wish to help the Russians, I don't believe. And the Russians, and they are not on the same side. There is a puppet master. And one day, perhaps, we will speak about that. And I end with that little epilogue just so that I don't mislead anybody into believing that these European leaders are consciously hoping that Russia will win and destroy Europe. It may be the case, but that's not my opinion as yet. I believe that there is greater subtlety to this thing than that obvious explanation. Anyway, thank you for watching this video. We appreciate it. Like, share, subscribe, and may God bless all of you. Bye-bye.